Hello, folks. It's Ted again. We left off last time. Uh, we were, I basically had made, I'll actually just show you. Um, I changed the collision rules for the buildings in the game. So now we're going to actually do another playthrough. Um, you'll see as I play through, but what I'm gonna do is just play the game and comment on some of the things that I notice. Ooh, gosh, this is not the greatest starting point. This might be a little bit tricky to get right. Um, yeah, so in the last stream, we updated the collision logic for buildings that you place on your deck. We made it so that the player can kind of move around them a lot more, much more easily. We also made it so that, well, I did this after the stream, but I made it so actually the player kind of like walks behind the buildings, which looks a lot, it actually looks a lot better. So this is interesting in a few different respects. I'm just trying to think about like what's the direction that I want to go here. I would say this is probably a bad roll of the dice because I don't have any resources that I'm starting with. And so I'm just kind of like, ugh. And a lot of like, there's actually a lot of stuff that's like really far away, which is kind of not good. So I'm going to play it anyway though, because I want to get a sense for what it feels like to play the game, even if you get a bad roll of the dice. And then maybe this will like inform some decisions about how to maybe what I need to do is put in some logic that kind of guarantees that there's more resources around the starting area. But basically what I want to do is maybe do a few things to just kind of buffer against um, a bad start, right? Or just bad starts generally. And what do I consider a bad start? I guess I consider a bad start something kind of like this, where you can tell that there are resources out there in the world, right? But basically anything that I want to, there's nothing that's like close by to my starting position that I can just grab easily. And that actually makes it really quite difficult. So, and I've tried to kind of balance the game a little bit better in this regard, you'll see. But it still feels like there's some ways that I could get like a lot of bad draws. What I'm going to do though is just try anyway and see what I can get. Maybe what I will do is this. Problem is if I put that all the way out there, it's going to be difficult to. So I think that's about as far as I can build. And then on this first face, yeah, gosh. Ooh, this is going to be tough to defend. But I have to defend it anyway, so here we go. I got lucky. I got lucky because one side of the deck doesn't have these post holes on it, right? So I might be able to get my thing all the way out there, right? Hopefully. But actually, you see, it's good to. I had a playthrough yesterday where I actually got pretty far in the game. And that was good because I got to kind of see a little bit more of what can happen. Yeah, it's going to be really difficult to get those guys out. No, don't go there, don't go there, don't go. Okay. Okay, good. So I have enough to do a deck panel. That's good. Okay, and so I got 4 energy. Actually, that's better. So I can get a card. And I can also get yeah, it's tough, right? If I put more post holes there, I can get the card and then I can kind of move down. So maybe I do that because it's more defensible. I need the card in order to like really build anything new. This is going to be tough. I mean, thankfully I can at least like defend most of what I've got. I've got really just a handful of turns, to be honest, before it starts getting really tough. So I'm going to need some kind of turrets pretty soon, or else it's just going to be impossible to defend this thing. And then, yeah, it'll get tough. But actually, I had a playthrough yesterday where I actually got so far into it that thing is, if I grab the card, there's nothing where I can have the resources, so that's probably a bad idea. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get the resource. And I'm going to get this question mark. And then I'm going to go for the card later. I think that makes sense. I don't know. We shall see. This game has kind of it's got like a bit of a medium, or like a bit of a, how do I say? I got to like the mid game actually what I found was that I wasn't really able to do quite as much as I wanted to in the later parts. In the later parts of the game, I found that I got to a point where I got kind of bored. So I actually got to a point, okay, just energy. That's not terrible because then now I'm getting one of these per turn, so maybe I can turn it around. I can do something here. I can actually put a deck panel there. Okay, what are my choices? FRW turret or FRH turret? We're going with FRW turret. Those are actually a lot easier to place. Okay, so this isn't looking too bad. And the reason is I changed the cost of this. So I was doing like a little bit of off the cuff like balancing of the game before I like kind of as I was designing it yesterday, or as I was playing with it yesterday. I did just a little bit of one of the things I did is it's kind of became clear to me after one playthrough that the very powerful stuff like the area turret, like deck panel area turret, those turrets actually, they're extremely powerful, but it's weird because once you get those, then you don't want to buy anything else, is kind of what I noticed. So once I get the panel area turret, then I tend to not want to use any of the other cards. And maybe that's like the way it should be, but it sort of feels like it shouldn't be that way. What I noticed was that this particular, and there's all kinds of different ways that you can balance it out. And actually what I think I want is probably something like more like Factorio, where you have things that kind of have, I guess what I would say is there are different tiers, sort of naturally. This turret is kind of like the lowest tier, right? It's just got a basic fire rate. It's not really fast, it's not really slow, but it's like acceptably okay, right? And the thing about it is it only costs energy. It doesn't cost this other resource that you have to go out and get. So you start the game with like an energy income, right? And that's what allows you to build this deck structure, right? But the turret itself only costs you this basic thing that you always get. So you don't have to expand in order to use a turret. And the same is true of the repair bay, right? But this thing is the first thing that you get that's a little bit more powerful. And it requires that you have one of these stone resources, right? So it costs 1 stone, all right? And it costs a little bit more energy, so it's a little bit more expensive. But then the area turret, the turret that gets like a bonus from both the width and the height multiplied together, that turret was, I think it used to cost 7 stone. And so then what you would want to do, what I felt I would want to do is like, I felt this kind of urge to like save up to get that thing, right? And, but then once I started being able to put down just a few of those, I was spamming the map with just that thing. And then all of a sudden this thing didn't really seem all that appealing because it would just cost me my stone income, right? The whole time. It would just cost me, 5 energy, 1 stone in order to be able to place it. No, 5 energy and I think 3 stone. And so then it kind of costs like, it wasn't, comparatively priced well enough. Gosh, there's like, that's an interesting thing to consider is though, like basically like I'm solving some kind of like economics problem by doing this. Like it's like I'm observing my own customer behavior here. Uh, but yeah, it just didn't feel like comparatively priced. It really felt like, actually maybe the kind of problem that I had was similar to like, how like when you go to the movie theater, right? Like, oh gosh, this makes me kind of seem old, I used to go to the movie theater. And then when I went to the movie theater, they would have like the different drink sizes, right? Or like the different popcorn sizes. And they would always kind of intentionally price it so that like, the most expensive, like the large, right? That would cost like, I don't know, like $3.50, maybe $4.50 or something like that, right? But then like the medium would cost like $4, right? And then the small would cost like $3.75 or something like that. And so it's like, yeah, you could buy the small soda or you could buy the medium soda, but like really like why would you do that when, the large soda is like just 75 cents more. And so, it's like, yeah, you have prices technically speaking, but not really because like I'm just going to end up buying like, the most expensive soda that I can. And you know that already. So you've kind of like done this like weird price manipulation on me. That's kind of like how it felt to me. And that's also how this game, how the previous like cost structure felt to me in this game. It really felt like the most powerful stuff was just not comparatively priced enough. It didn't feel like I could get a good deal on some of these smaller improvements, and so then I wouldn't use them. And so now what I decided to do intentionally was to change the pricing structure just a little bit so that these smaller kind of they are still big they're still improvements, right? They're good turrets to have, but they're kind of comparatively priced, right? So that I'm more inclined to use them. I'm more inclined to spend a few turns building them instead of just waiting to get this bigger kind of a thing, which I will get. I definitely do want to get those, but the point is kind of a how do I say? It is, I want you to use those a little bit more. Otherwise, like, why is it in the game if you never use it? You know what I mean? It should feel like everything in your tool belt is like, it's got a place there. It should be something that you would feel like you would want to use, right? It should never be like, oh, there's just a bunch of superfluous crap in there that you never use. That's kind of my thought. Okay, so we're going to keep playing. No. It's just like, no. Okay, and also like another thing that I'm kind of noticing that's cool about this is like, do you notice like how many times I'm like, no, like, and I feel like I have to like run all the way across the distance of the deck, right? That's actually intentional, and that's also kind of a thing that happens in Factorio quite a bit, and it's one of the things I really love about that game. Factorio always has this feeling of no, 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 no. I need to like, I gotta stop what I'm doing. I gotta like run all the way across the base, right? And so you notice that, my base or my deck is under attack by under like all of these different directions, right? There's like all these guys. I'm like trying. I don't have any defensive structures up yet because I'm saving for this thing, which thank God I could put down now, right? So I can put this down, and maybe I'll put it at this edge of the deck, right? So now I have 2 energy to spend. So I'll put this there, right? And what's great now is I actually have the ability to like walk around it, which I did not have previously. So I'm pretty psyched about that. But yeah, I'm just like, no, 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 no. And I'm running all around and I'm trying to like, defend myself here. But that kind of thing is actually going to be really fun to play with later. Because what I want to do is I want to have there be things like a deck sealant that you can put down that actually makes you run a lot faster. I'm considering also having like maybe teleporters that you can put down that allow you to teleport the player from one side of the deck to the other, something like that, right? And so you think about, all that kind of stuff and you're just like, then it becomes a little bit, and actually Factorio doesn't quite have that, doesn't have teleporters. Well, but it kind of does because it's got trains, right? So if you really need to get from point A to point B, really, and kind of traverse all the way across the map, it's got trains. You can hop on trains. And so that's one way to kind of, if you build out this like train infrastructure in that game, then you have a few different ways of kind of being at one place, more than one place at the same time, outside of just putting all the defense turrets down. So it's it does give you that option. One thing that I'm also noticing is pretty darn soon I'm going to need to put down some kind of a repair bay, right? Another thing is maybe at some point, because I'm also noticing that I have this feeling right now of, gosh, like, wouldn't it be nice if I could somehow bank up this 2 energy that I have, right? I can't bank that up and then use it to purchase this thing, which is what I would actually prefer to do. So maybe if there was something in the game that maybe what it does is it's like an energy bank, almost like a battery or something, right? Where what I could do is I could put some amount of energy in it from this turn, not like a lot, right? But maybe just some small amount, and then I could go back to the battery on the next turn, and I could retrieve it. You know what I mean? And then that way. And then that would make for some interesting kinds of things, because then maybe there are certain types of things that you would want to build that are very high energy cost, but so they would require you to build all these batteries, right, to store up your energy to then spend it on them. But I'm just thinking that, gosh, it's not that it would be like the energy is entirely wasted, because I will spend it to expand the deck a little bit. Right? Like, I definitely want to do that. Oh, this is interesting. I might make it so you can actually go around this corner. Let's look at that collision logic. Oh, that is just barely. Yeah. I probably will make... Oh, actually, I can go around that corner. Okay. But it's like barely. Huh. And it's only if I, like... maybe that's not so bad. Okay, I guess I can go around that corner. This doesn't feel totally right, but it looks like I can. Okay, interesting. Anyway, that's another thing that I notice is, and I'll actually put it to do in that just says like, hey, let's have something like that in the game. You'll notice I've got all these different things as like cards. Energy bank that lets you store some small amount of energy per turn for any turn in the future, right? So it's literally like a bank. I can go in there and I can deposit energy and then I can take it back out. Again, like, I don't know if any of these ideas are good, right? Like, maybe they're good, maybe they're not, but I'm just kind of like saying, here's some things that I feel like I would want to be able to do. So now I'm going to, there goes my phone. Now I'm going to like build a few more things. Question is, where do I want to go? Right? More resources would be good. More cards would be good. The thing is, though, if I expand too much in that direction, it's going to be harder to defend. I think more cards and more... Yeah, more cards. I'll do that. All right, here we go. Where are the enemies? I'll position myself central to the deck so I can take on. Okay, yeah, and I don't have quite enough there. And actually, see that turret is pretty good. It's useful. It's actually helping me out. Now its fire rate might be a little bit higher than it should be, but overall, not bad. I also recognize that I need some way to repair the deck. So I got to start getting some repairs. And then because I can't really use my energy this turn, I need to spend it wisely. So I'm going to do this. I think I'm just going to go for this card so that if I can grab the card, then I can kind of know what to expand towards next turn. This still isn't looking quite as great as it could, but at least now I have a way to repair the deck. I probably should have put another turret down if I'm honest, but whatever. Okay, they don't like that. Crap. That turret's actually really useful. This is playing better than I would like, or better than I would have thought. I'm gonna place this on this section over here. So now I've got these two turrets here, right? So that one. And I do have one repair that I can use, so I need to be really judicious about how I use it. Where do I want to put it? I think I want to put it there because that whole panel kind of depends on me. So now I'm going to walk around here. Oof. All right, here we go. I think I'm actually going to end up filling that whole section with that kind of turret just because that's probably more important than anything else I could do right now. It kind of builds me up. Yeah, and that's proving to be wise. Now that's an area that the turret can't get at, so I need to be really careful there. This is getting better, you know. And again, like, okay. This strategy seems to be working, so I'm going to keep doing it. I need to be really careful about which panels I choose to keep repairing. I tend to prefer to repair the weakest panel, right? Why do I have like one a turn? I thought I spent one to... Oh, because I had one turn where yeah, that's right. There's one turn where I didn't buy it. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up this panel here with that special turret. Because it's the kind of turret that will get an increased fire rate by being on a wide panel. So that's kind of what I'm doing there. So this thing will basically act as like a fire hose, or it should act like a fire hose. I should get a bunch of useful shots out of that thing. And then it just kind of depends on like where are the worst enemies coming from, right? Are they coming from a spot that where I can get at them or not? And that all seems good. Okay, so I survived again. Which do we repair, right? That looks kind of like the worst. And again, I'm just filling this up again because it's really, that's proven to be pretty powerful. So I want to keep doing that. And I've still got 1 energy to use. I will probably, there are many ways that I can expand, but I'll probably put a post hole there. Let's defend some more, my friends. Okay. So, you know, it's really funny because like so many of the ideas that you will get for your game come from your game itself. Okay, crap. Now we crashed. Why did we crash? That's not telling me enough. Okay, I guess I have to like quit out of the program. And I didn't even get my little, okay, so that must have been some kind of assertion failure that I hit. Oh, that sucks. All right. All good. Actually a pretty useful playthrough in my opinion. You got to see a number of different things. I think you got to see that it's feeling more like I've got what I would call one like viable middle strategy or like mid, how do I put this? I have one viable early to mid game strategy. Taking something like a turret that gets a higher fire rate depending on the width of the panel that it's sitting on, right? And I can place that down on a specific panel like that. And then I can kind of choose to expand in that way. So to me, that actually feels like pretty good progress. The game that I played yesterday, I think I maybe played 45 minutes to an hour of the game. And I got kind of to a point where I actually had built up a lot of these like turrets where their firepower depends on the area of the panel that they're sitting on. And those things were like really powerful. They were like a fire hose. And those actually, that ended up getting to a point where I felt like I could actually almost defend the deck indefinitely, and I had to kind of stop the game for other reasons. So that's a cool thing. I think what I'm beginning to notice as well is I'm actually starting to bump up against some of the more technical constraints or technical problems. What I mean by that is my game engine for this is it's obviously I did not, because when you're prototyping, you know, you only should really make things so robust. You shouldn't make them ultra robust early on when you're just exploring an idea. What you should instead do, I think, especially in prototyping, is build out the gameplay and play it and keep playing it up until you hit problems with the engine, right? And then you're going to have to be like, okay, now in order for me to even consider exploring the gameplay even more, like seeing where this goes, now I have to fix some of these problems, right? Like, and I hope this is not misconstrued, because what I am also not advocating that you make really insane design decisions, right? Like, let's not be doing like, you know, template meta programming, crazy object orient, like, no, like, let's start with sane programming practices, simple procedural C style programming, right? where we at least are aware of, what I guess what Casey Muratori calls performance aware programming. I think that's very important. So you should be entering this with a performance aware programming mindset, even while you're prototyping. I really believe that, because at least you're starting from like a sane. You're beginning from a sane starting point, right? But then as you prototype, I think there's a big difference between starting from a sane starting point performance wise versus being obsessed with performance when you really should be focusing on prototyping, or obsessed with robustness when you really should be focused on exploring the gameplay space, right? And so I guess the argument that I'm making is you should care about robustness. It is important, but when prototyping, you need to prototype out the gameplay enough to the point that you start to bump up against the sort of natural constraints, right? So a lot of these early systems I knew weren't that robust. I kind of threw them together. I kind of figured some of them might be a little bit error prone, but I accepted that because it's what allowed me to kind of get the game going. It's what allowed me to sort of build the loops and get it all working quickly. But now that I can actually play my game and be entertained for more than 30 minutes, which is, I think, kind of an accomplishment there, I now am playing so long that I'm starting to bump up against the constraints of the systems that I first set up. So what might some of those be? Well, one of them is, I think that the enemies actually, there's nothing like detect, there's no logic like saying, so they can kind of spawn anywhere, right? I don't think there's even anything saying that if they spawn inside of a rock, that's bad. I think it's like actually acceptable that they can do that or something. And so then sometimes as I'm playing through, occasionally I'll get these playthroughs where I get far enough that the game spawns a bunch of enemies and then like it just quits because they spawn inside of a rock or something. Like obviously that's not robust. That needs to be made more robust. Okay, so that's a problem. But then I think there's also maybe a problem with the entity's targeting system. So if they finish destroying a piece of something and then they have to like retarget something else, that's actually a problem because the search area for what they target, like I don't really have great logic there for that. And so it might just be that they never find a target and then the game gets, stuck. Or I think I like have it just do an assertion failure and then quit. My point being is that there's definitely a few things that are not robust, and that's kind of intentional. But now I'm starting to hit that ceiling that I've kind of created for myself. So I probably need to do a little bit more game engine work to expand the ceiling just a little bit further and make it feel like I have maybe a little bit more breathing room to do design inside of. And then obviously, if I decide to ship this game to the wider public and I decide to like spend, gobs of money on artists and designers and all that other stuff and like, get funding and whatnot, then that becomes a different thing altogether too, because the sort of bar for like a shipping product is much, much higher than what it would be for a simple prototype like this. So I'm going to have to really invest in a lot of that too, eventually. But my point is, start from a sane place, expand, a little bit, and then keep expanding in terms of robustness, sort of as needed. If the game engine is getting in the way of you prototyping something, then it's probably time to start doing a little bit of engine work, but don't get like obsessive about it. Like don't get like so honed in on small details that you can't like see the bigger picture. You really, it's a special blend of skills. And actually, I kind of think that's sort of like one of the things, like this tweet that I had about some software engineers don't like to be managed by like non-technical people. I think what that is, for me at least, it's more about, I know that I'm the kind of person that can actually conceive of the whole product, right? And I have done that before. And I tend not to actually get stuck in the weeds. And so I know that it's possible for engineers to actually, for people that have the engineering skill, to also gain this other skill of, looking at the product and learning how to prototype things. And so I guess it strikes me as a little bit off that because I have the engineering skill set, that I would always need someone to be doing that part for me, right? That it strikes me as like a little bit infantilizing. That like I couldn't, eventually learn to develop that skill set better, right? And that I could improve in my prototyping, and I could improve in my ability to see the big picture of the thing that I'm working on, right? So, and then of course, what makes it even weirder is like, the person telling me that I should be staying on focused is like sitting in a swimming pool. It sort of like adds kind of like, icing to the cake, I guess. And I think maybe that's like what a lot of people feel is like, how about we don't just lump people into a big box? And it, like, the thing is, the stereotype of engineers, like the stereotype of the autistic, nerdy engineer that like can only really zero in on fine details, it's probably true, actually. I mean, it's probably, doesn't have many social skills, whatever. It's probably true, but then that's kind of the problem with stereotypes, right? Is like, if we recognize that there might, even if there is a little bit of truth to a stereotype, I think it's useful to always judge people as individuals. And so if you're running an organization, you might look at an individual and just be like, hey, I noticed that this person is actually interested in the big picture. How can I help to develop that person's interests a little bit more? How can I help, push them along that path? Because that's what they're, that's probably what they're here for. And so, you can't always make everybody happy, and I get that. And I also understand like why there have to be strict boundaries. But I also think, if you're looking at trying to keep people working with you for the long term, if you don't give them any opportunities for growth, like don't be surprised when they just like leave, because people don't like being stuffed in a box. Like generally speaking, I think most people, maybe not everybody, maybe some people do like being stuffed in a box, and then if that's what makes them happy, like great. But like some of us like kind of don't. And so if you recognize that in someone that you're working with, like you should probably try to help them out. Now, you might not always be able to, but I think you should try. So you should try and help kind of develop those things, develop their interests. Like I think that's part of what's fun about it is to actually help people grow in these new capacities that they're interested in, right? Like that's that's kind of what I think a good employer would do naturally. So, all right, so that spiel is over. Maybe I'll go into some more programming. Maybe I'll also cut that for YouTube. We'll see. But what are we doing here? Got to go back to this. So what I've done based on my last playtest is I've come upon many of these things that need to be worked on, right? So deck collapse death shouldn't happen. So I did that one. Game can no longer be played because enemies spawn into rocks. Yeah, because that's another bug. I'll also put the targeting bug in here. Game appears to crash on an assertion failure when the enemy targeting system can't find a valid target, valid next target. All right. So these two bugs I probably should fix because they're sort of my technical ceiling, right? If I can't fix these bugs, then I can't really figure out what the mid to late game of this particular game looks like. What's really kind of astonishing or rather fascinating to me is I didn't even really know that like this, it's weird when, because all I did was like, okay, I'm gonna start with like a really simple premise. Like you build this deck out and then you get these buildings and it's like a tower defense game, right? And it's strange to me that there is naturally I guess this is just the consequence of the rules, right? Like that there's an early game and then there's a mid game and then there's a late game, right? Just naturally, like that's just how it works. What I felt like I was bumping up against yesterday was it seemed like I had transitioned into the mid game, but there wasn't anything in the game that made it feel more like I was in the mid game, if that makes sense. So there was like one mid game thing that I could build, right? But there weren't really any other improvements that I would classify as mid-game. And then also in terms of the enemies that I was facing, it was really just the same enemy, but like a lot of them. And so then kind of what this makes me think is for there to be a mid-game or more of a substantive mid-game, I think I need maybe some stronger, more bullet spongy enemies. Something maybe a little bit beefier that takes more hits. Something that you have to knock back a little bit better. That would make sense to me. And that actually, that gets to be interesting because then I get thinking about what kind of mid-tier structure in the game or what kind of mid-tier power-up would I need to have in order to effectively fend off something like that, right? And so I'm just kind of working backwards, right? From like, as a designer, I'm kind of working backwards from, I want it to feel like there's a substantive mid-game, but I need to, and what that means is there needs to be enemies that feel like a mid-game enemy. And then there needs to be things that feel like a valid counter to that mid-game enemy. And maybe what I had built up in my playthrough that I had last night actually was that. It was something approaching that, but there wasn't quite enough of it. And I do have some sense of what the late game is going to look like, right? So the late game, I think, is going to involve this thing. I'll show you. It's gonna involve like a lot of multipliers on top of multipliers. That's my thinking. I'll show you. So my late game, I'm gonna have this thing called the Omni turret. This is just one example of a late game thing that I came up with. The Omni turret, it gets all of its bonuses. It basically acquires the properties of the. Okay, so let's imagine. Let's put on our pretend hat here. So like this Omni turret here, what if, for example, I placed next to it this, like an instance of like this fire rate area turret. Like let's say I had one of these right next to it and it's just spitting out all kinds of stuff because it's on a really big panel. And then maybe what I did is I put one of these here, like this kind of turret, this like high damage, right? Okay. So, and then maybe what I did is I put like this one here, right? Like a turret like this. And then maybe what I put was this one, maybe like one of these like right here, okay? Now, okay. So what if I could do that, all right? Now, if the logic of this turret is it acquires the abilities of the turrets that are next to it, right? That gets to be pretty darn powerful, right? Because what I've got now is a very high fire rate, very high distance, very high damage, very high range, very high damage, very high knockback power turret, right? And so that's going to be probably one of the most overpowered things like in the game, right? There's not really going to be many things that compare to something like that. And so that gets to be a little bit interesting. But that's what I'm saying is if you're trying to think about the whole arc of a game, right? It's almost, maybe it's like writing a book backwards, right? It's kind of like, if I was to like write a novel, probably one of the things I would do, I would figure out the world. I would figure out like, what are the rules of that world in that novel? What are the characters in that novel? What are they kind of for, what motivates them, etc. And then how does that interact with the different systems? But at some point, it would become pretty clear to me kind of what the end of that novel would be like, right? What would it all be building up to? I don't know if you read much science fiction, but like, I'm a huge fan of Dune. I really love that book. And what's so great about it is it's got this deep like world building aspect to it. And it has this very clear, very stark ending that happens at the and it's everything is kind of building up to it, and there's all this foreshadowing. And actually one of the main characters, well, the main character Paul, is this beautiful delivery of this foreshadowing of this cataclysmic event at the end of the book. But it's very clear that Frank Herbert worked out that world, and that he worked out just in his imagination, maybe like scribbling some stuff on the piece of paper or whatever, but he worked out what that was going to be, and he had that kind of anchoring point at the end, right? At some point he came up with that anchoring point, and then throughout the whole thing, that anchor at the end gives you this more of an ability to figure out what's going to be in the middle of it, And so now that I do, I actually have more of this anchoring point of, okay, what does the end of this game look like? Very late game, what are we doing? What does it look like? That better informs all the other stuff that's going to kind of happen in the middle of the game, right? And possibly even in the beginning of the game to build up to this thing. Because this thing is probably going to require 3 separate resources in a very high quantity. It's probably going to also require you to spend a lot of energy to build it, right? And you're going to have to acquire all of those resources separately in order to build any of these things. So like maybe this kind of thing requires a resource that's separate. And actually, one thing too that might be a good sort of color coding is that I think I will change that actually. So maybe these kinds of turrets that depend on the width of the panel, they're going to rely on this resource that's kind of like, it's like a red rock, right? And so I'm kind of drawing that association between the resource color and then the thing that it builds, right? So part of it is, okay, I know what bonus it gives me, and I know what resource I need to get to use this thing. And then I also, and that's all kind of associated loosely, right? So it feels like a red thing. And then similarly here, with things that have like height, where the height of the panel determines the effectiveness of it, maybe that's a pink-ish rock. And again, like, I'm not, I'm trying to just be a little bit more abstract with the design. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to say like, okay, this that the resources even need to be anything that are associated with something like real in the world, right? Because I think that's later. I think that's more the artist's job. It's just to say like I want to draw that kind of color association or that there needs to be some kind of designer association between the resource that's required to build the thing and then the thing, right? And then this thing becomes a combination of the two different resources, which is actually how that works, right? Because, you know, an area is just the width times the height. So then naturally, this thing would require, it would have a resource cost that combines both of these things, right? I think that would actually be kind of interesting. And then maybe there's like a separate third resource that you have to acquire to build this thing. And so you've actually, to really get up to that late game, you've got to have a lot of these different kinds of resources working together. And then something like this, you know, combines all of these different powers that you've been acquiring throughout the game. And then there's other cards in between, like a card that, I think that there needs to be a few different other possible cards. I think one card that makes a lot of sense to me is a card that allows you to move something, like move a structure from one location to another. So maybe all it is I use my move card to pick up to turn one of my existing turrets into a card, you know, and then I can just move it somewhere else because I've already paid the cost for it, right? So it becomes like a cost-free card that I can then place somewhere else, right? I think that would be great. Hopefully that makes sense. Because then what I can do is, like, as I'm starting to build these bigger and bigger panels, I'm starting to build these bigger and bigger deck structures, I can then move my previous infrastructure from one part to another, and I can kind of mix and match and move things around, and I can start to build this more robust, more defensible thing, and start to move more into the late game. Having the ability to reconfigure the deck, okay, instead of just building onto it, that, in my opinion, feels more like a mid-game kind of thing to do than a late game. Late game feels more like I'm leveraging all the decisions that I made mid-game in order to reap this massive reward in the late game, if that makes sense. Another thing that's kind of interesting that I also want to point out is there is a feeling or a sense in which it is almost as if I have slightly diverged from the central concept of the game, which is like, it's a roguelike deck builder where you literally build a deck, haha. And now I've got all of these things that almost seem kind of like science fiction-y in their construction, right? And that's interesting to me because, you know, my thinking on that is something like, with games, I think that the gameplay itself is the most important thing. That has to be right before anything else works. And you might start with a hook like, you know, it's a roguelike deck builder where you literally build a deck, ha. And immediately what you think is that it's got to have this kind of like backyard theme, right? And it's got to have, you know, neighbors that attack the deck, and it's got to have all of these, and you're thinking more along the lines of like the story, the environmental, the presentation. But that is just a layer of aesthetic polish, in my opinion. It's more like a veneer on top of the gameplay. And actually, I think what you should be doing is using that hook as a starting point to really prototype out the gameplay and to find interesting gameplay. And then if at the end of that prototyping process of like discovering the interesting gameplay that's there with that set of rules, if you still end up with something where you can work that into the story, right? Your original conception of the story. So this, you know, my original conception of the story was, I'm a rogue deck builder, you know, I'm really mad at the city council for passing this resolution that prevents me from expanding the deck, and now I'm just going to expand the deck as much as I want. Ha ha. That that might now conflict with how the game actually plays, right? And so that could be a problem because now it looks like if I'm actually thinking about what the late game of this thing looks like, it really seems like I've gone almost totally off the rails here. Now it's like I've got this thing called an omni turret that gets the powers of all the other stuff that's next to it. And what's that? And like, that almost seems like alien technology, and it almost seems like I've gone into the realm of science fiction. And I think to that I would say, okay, well, now it's a science fiction game, right? So now how do we change the story slightly to fit the gameplay, right? I think usually the story should change to fit the gameplay and not the other way around. Because at the core of it, gameplay is actually what people come to games for most of the time. So I'm not going to make this a weaker kind of roguelike deck building tower defense game in service of a joke. I would much rather make the joke not work as well, but have the game be really awesome and fun and satisfying to play. And so that's kind of why all of these things that you see here, they're not really backyard themed. They're not, I don't have like a grill tower, that like shoots like flaming burgers or something. Maybe that's where we go with the design at some point. But the point is, what I'm doing with the design first and foremost is using clear communication, even if it's a little bit abstract and it's not necessarily tied to the story layer. At least it clearly communicates the design first. And then if I figure if I can do that part easily, then it makes it simpler when I work with an artist to figure out what the aesthetic theme is going to be, right? Because maybe it goes 100% in a science fiction direction. And the deck that we're building is actually a space habitat on another planet that's infested with hostile aliens. That could work. Why not? Actually, that makes a lot of the other design considerations much more plausible because it explains all these other things like, why are there these pink rocks? Why are there these purple rocks? Why this resource? Why that resource? Well, it's an alien planet, and that's just what we do, on the alien planet. And my guy he's just got like a little, he's got a little spacesuit on, and he's running around and protecting the base, and that's just what it is, man. Like, it actually becomes a lot easier to explain a lot of these things, or maybe it's a space station, right? And so the rocks that are out there, they're like asteroids, and they've got these different minerals in them, and you need them. That's another possible valid way to look at it too. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, I wouldn't necessarily allow an aesthetic theme to rule so much over the gameplay that it harms the gameplay. You really should be spending that prototyping process focusing strictly on, is this a fun game to play? Let's figure out what will make the game fun to play. And then let's circle back later on how to make that a story or how to like present that aesthetically. And maybe it weakens the joke. Maybe it makes the hook not as strong, that particular hook not as strong. But I think that's kind of acceptable because there's probably a bunch of other ways that you can kind of like, work that in. Maybe you have like all these different acronyms like for the deck or for joists or for, it can be a science fiction themed thing and still like work, right? So I'm going to stop there. This is more of a design discussion because the reason I want to have this discussion is during yesterday's playthrough, it became very clear to me that a mid-game is starting to emerge, right? And now it seems like my job as a designer is to somehow bridge the early game to the mid game to the end game, right? Because I don't necessarily want to fill in everything that's in the game, right? Not right away. I don't necessarily want to put in all the content that's in the game right away. What I want to do is I want to build the whole thing all the way from start to finish, all the way from early game to mid game to end game, right? Get all those pieces in there. And maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's not, totally all correct. But at least there's this feeling that there is an early game, a middle game, and then a clear end game. And then that's the prototype that I would present as the first playable prototype, because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? It's got enough of that in it. This current iteration I could not really present. It is playable. It's actually playable, but it doesn't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. And I want to get there before putting it in front of people. And actually, it might not necessarily, the thing is that's interesting about it is there doesn't necessarily need to be a lot in the game in order to make it feel like it has a clear beginning, middle, and end. It might not even be that we fill up because the temptation, I think, right now for anybody that's like a software engineering type, the temptation is to just fill out all the cards. Like, let's make a ton of cards. Let's make all these features, like feature. But I think a more holistically minded person would instead say, okay, the only reason that I want to put another card in or put another thing in is because it will get the game to a state where it has a clear beginning, middle, and end. All right? Once it's true that it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, then we can start asking more questions about how we make the whole experience better. What kinds of panels, what kind of cards, what kinds of things can we add in to kind of fill out that traversal of the graph from beginning to middle to end? That's after you've already prototyped out or gotten the game from the beginning to the middle to the end, in my humble opinion. So I want to get it to where it feels like I've gotten that far. Like I know what the end game is like, So I'll stop there. I actually will stop there. Let's see if there's any more questions. All right, I'll see you next time.